What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the spot where we kick back and react to all kind of different things. Alright, so what we got going on today? We're about to get into another science video. Here we are with Science Unbound. This video is the bacteria that could wipe out humanity. Alright, so let's go ahead and see what kind of nightmare-filled bacteria he's about to talk about. Let's check it out. Let's go.
If you're watching this video, you almost certainly just lived through the COVID-19 pandemic, the worst pandemic humanity has faced since the Spanish flu of 1918. It's possible to know exactly how many people contracted COVID. Many people with mild symptoms who tested themselves at home didn't do anything to be officially recorded, and others didn't get tested while they were infected because they were asymptomatic. According to estimates from various health organizations around the world, it's believed that up to 60% of the world's population contracted some form of the virus at least once. Since the exact number of infections is unknown, we also can't say for certain just how deadly COVID was. Based on the number of confirmed cases and deaths, the disease would have about a 1% mortality rate. Knowing that if you had a 99% chance of survival if you tested positive probably doesn't sound that bad at first until you multiply it by the hundreds of millions or even billions of total cases worldwide. It may not have been a civilization-ending disaster, but we can all probably agree that the pandemic was a pretty miserable time, except for everyone except the American bidet industry. But what if things were much, much worse? What if the pandemic had been caused by an airborne pathogen with a 100% mortality rate? In a perfect world, everybody would just lock themselves in their houses and wait for the infection to die off. But people don't really like being told what to do. There are also essential services that would require people to leave their homes. People like doctors, first responders, and Amazon delivery drivers would have no choice but to continue.
The people that don't know that don't like being told what to do, they just be wiped out. They'd be the first ones to go, the hard-hit ones. Even with COVID, even with that, there were people who were talking crap about it's not a real disease and didn't take any measures whatsoever, and then you found them on the obituary later. It wasn't everybody, but those people who were who didn't take it serious at all, treated like it was like nothing at all. Yeah, it's like, okay, it's not going to wipe out humanity, but it's still a disease. It's still something that you need to prepare for and take the right precautions for if you end up catching it. I remember when I caught it, it knocked me out for like a few days. It was, I hated it.
Continue performing their jobs, risking exposure to themselves and anyone they come into contact with in their attempt to keep society from collapsing. Of course, such a deadly airborne disease sounds like ridiculous fear-mongering. There are very few diseases that can boast a 100% mortality rate. Of those that do, 2 are parasites, which are not airborne. Another is caused by prions, which not only are not airborne, but are mainly spread via cannibalism. Then, of course, there's the rabies virus, which thankfully is also not airborne and which has an extremely long incubation period before symptoms occur, during which a person can be treated. That just leaves one disease, which is guaranteed to be fatal if left untreated, and treatment needs to begin within the first 24 hours of symptoms arising. It is the most deadly bacteria in the world. It can be airborne, and it is humanity's oldest enemy. The bacteria's official name is Yersinia pestis, but you probably just know it as the plague.
Okay. Now that's a nightmare fuel for you right there. The plague did a lot of damage, so yeah. Please don't tell me this is going to be about the plague possibly coming back.
Now, you've almost certainly heard of the Black Death, the 2-century-long string of outbreaks of bubonic plague that killed anywhere from 30 to 60% of the entire population of Europe. The bubonic plague was caused by the Yersinia pestis bacteria, but it isn't the only disease caused by the virus. Yersinia pestis actually causes 3 different types of plague. The bubonic plague is actually the least deadly of the 3. Bubonic plague is an infection of the lymphatic system, and it occurs when the bacteria enters a person's body through the skin. Now, this usually occurs due to bites from infected fleas, though it can also spread from exposure to bodily fluids from an infected person. The bubonic plague begins with flu-like symptoms, but the most iconic symptom is buboes, enlarged and infected lymph nodes in the groin, armpits, or the neck. Later stages of the disease can also result in necrosis of the extremities, resulting in it earning the name Black Death. While the most famous outbreaks are the ones that ripped through Europe in the 14th through 16th centuries, these plagues have been, plaguing mankind for thousands of years. The first recorded recorded bubonic plague dates back to the 6th century in the Byzantine Empire, though archaeological research has found Yersinia pestis bacteria in the teeth of bodies that are over 5,000 years old. But as we said, this bacteria is really 3 diseases in one, and bubonic plague is the least deadly. So how the disease manifests is dependent on where in the human body the bacteria is able to make its home, with the next possible infection being septicemic plague. This occurs when the bacteria enters and begins multiplying in the bloodstream. This can sometimes occur from flea bites or bites from other infected animals, though it more commonly occurs from either infected bodily fluids coming into contact with an open wound or from untreated bubonic plague spreading to the blood. Some of the same symptoms can be expected, such as fever, chills, and necrosis, but the remaining symptoms are much worse. Toxins in the bacteria cause a condition known as disseminated intravascular coagulation. This causes tiny blood clots to form throughout the body. Not only can this completely cut off circulation to parts of the body, resulting in further necrosis, but it depletes the blood of its clotting agents. This results in the infected person coughing up or vomiting up blood, as well as bleeding out of their nose and anus. All of these issues with the blood eventually
that's a double whammy right there. That is your nose and both, like, pretty much. Just go ahead and say every hole at once. Just whoosh, man.
Bleeding out of their nose and anus. All of these issues with the blood eventually result in low blood pressure, shock, and organ failure before eventually causing death in the majority of cases. But the majority of cases still isn't 100%. So while this is the grossest and probably most miserable of the 3 diseases caused by Yersinia pestis, it is not the most deadly. It is also the hardest to transmit from person to person, as it has an extremely short incubation period, only a few hours. With little time to spread the bacteria before symptoms present themselves, it's unlikely a person with septicemic plague would spread the infection to anyone else, so long as they can avoid the urge to start biting people or vomiting blood.
For real. So that's one good thing about it. It's because it's so specific, we're most likely never going to see this version become a plague. You literally got to have it and then give it to somebody else by, just like you said, biting them or getting your fluids in an open wound. Like, very specific stuff. Nothing like, oh, you could just breathe it in, you know?
Blood all over them. And that finally brings us to the deadliest of the Yersinia pestis diseases, pneumonic plague. As you can hopefully guess from the name, the disease occurs when the bacteria starts growing inside a person's lungs. Worst of all, the initial symptoms will likely seem mild compared to the septicemic version of the disease. Pneumonic plague begins with fever, headaches, coughing, and weakness and fatigue. Those are the same symptoms that many different infections present, so they may not be an immediate cause for concern unless the person begins coughing up blood, which is a common symptom and a cause for concern. If you're coughing up blood, go to the doctor. From there, things take a sudden and dramatic turn for the worse. Pneumonia rapidly develops, resulting in shortness of breath, chest pain, and an increase in coughing. These symptoms eventually result in death from respiratory failure and shock, which can occur in as little as 36 hours after the symptoms presented. What separates pneumonic plague from the other forms is that it doesn't rely on a disease vector. Bubonic and septicemic plagues can be spread by highly irresponsible human interactions, but in general, they rely on fleas or occasionally mammals to bite people and spread infection. However, because pneumonic plague results from the bacteria growing inside the person's lungs, that means when they cough, they're going to spew bacteria everywhere. If that's not bad enough, a person infected with Yersinia pestis bacteria in their lungs is still contagious during the incubation period before symptoms start to present. This incubation period usually only lasts 1 to 3 days, but in some cases it can be as long as a week. That means a person could become infected and still have time to travel far away from the original outbreak before becoming symptomatic, though it is far more.
And on top of that, from where you said you can go and spread it to other people in those areas before you become symptomatic, before you start noticing anything. Eesh.
More contagious once symptoms present, they would still be contagious during this period of time, allowing for the disease to spread rapidly across the world. Now that all sounds pretty terrifying so far, and based on the hundreds of millions of people that have died from the plague throughout history, we know this isn't just baseless speculation on things that could potentially happen one day maybe. The one saving grace here is that Yersinia pestis is a bacterium and not a virus. The big difference between these two is that viruses aren't alive while bacteria are, and if there's one thing humans excel at, it's killing everything and anything that stands in the way. There are multiple antibiotics that are effective in treating the plague if it's caught early enough, generally within the first 24 hours of symptoms developing. So that must be the end of the story then. I mean, science won, and no bacteria, no matter how deadly, could ever pose a threat to humanity again, right? Everything's totally fine.
No, we already know that's that's never the case. It's never totally fine. The antibiotic resistant plague. Yeah, because antibiotics, they grow stronger than antibiotics all the time. That's why they're always coming out with new antibiotics. And that's why when you have to go on antibiotics, they say you got to make sure you finish the entire bottle. Because if you don't kill it, if you don't mess around and you give it time to build in your system, it'll become stronger than those antibiotics you're taking. Then they got to figure something else out.
So look, perhaps our celebration, a little bit premature there, because there is absolutely still something to worry about. There has been a rise in the appearance of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and unfortunately, the plague has made this transformation as well. The majority of modern cases of the plague appear in Madagascar and sub-Saharan Africa, and that is exactly where the discovery of the first antibiotic-resistant strain of the plague was made. In 1997, a 16-year-old boy contracted a strain of the plague that was found to be resistant to 8 different antibiotics that are used to treat the infection, including streptomycin and tetracycline, which are the 2 drugs usually used as the first line of defense against the plague. Luckily, this was an isolated incident. Researchers believe that the bacteria literally picked up its drug resistance by swapping genes with other bacteria like Salmonella and E. coli while in the gut of the flea that bit the boy. It was a terrifying discovery, but it was just one case, and after a few years, everybody just stopped panicking about it. So of course, that's when drug-resistant Yersinia pestis made its triumphant return. While nothing as terrifying as the strain...
Of course. Oh, it just happened one time. Okay, let's ignore it. It could never happen again. It could never happen again. Of course, that was the thought process. I swear, this is why it's like when you see certain plots in movies you think are dumb, they're not really as dumb as you think. Some of them are really based in reality because people are dumb.
First seen in 1997 has emerged again, there have been multiple cases of bubonic plague in which the bacteria was resistant to various antibiotics. Each strain is usually only resistant to 1 or 2 different drugs, though streptomycin resistance has become increasingly common. Now, this was all already really concerning, but in 2013, there was a new breakthrough in the potential downfall of humanity. A minor outbreak of the plague infected in Madagascar 22 people, with 3 of them dying. The strain was again resistant to streptomycin, but not to tetracycline. Fortunately for most of the patients, the 2 antibiotics had been administered simultaneously as soon as they were admitted to hospital. But this outbreak was different than all the other cases involving drug-resistant plague. The others had all been bubonic plague, but this time it was pneumonic. Most of the infected people had caught the disease from the original 3 who had died from it, making them the first confirmed cases of person-to-person transmission of an antibiotic-resistant variant of the bacteria. So, well, that's fun.
I know, right?
So, just how terrified should you be of Black Death 2.0? Now, the good news is that serious outbreaks of plague remain relatively rare. While the bacteria is present all across the world, the overall societal shift toward better hygiene has gone a long way to combat the bacteria from spreading to humans. In the United States, there's an average of about 7 cases of the plague per year, usually the bubonic type, and thus far, antibiotics have remained effective. Unless you happen to live in Madagascar or sub-Saharan Africa, where 95% of plague cases occur each year, it's probably not something that you need to worry about on a day-to-day basis. And even if you do live there, outbreaks are generally small and well contained as people understand just how deadly the plague can be. It's unlikely that a naturally occurring outbreak is going to get too out of hand, even if it is a drug-resistant strain. But of course, there are always unnaturally occurring outbreaks. The plague has been used as a biological weapon at least as far back as the 1300s, and at least as recently as World War II. During the war, Japan's infamous Unit 731 bred infected fleas to create plague bombs to drop over China. Following the war, both the US and Russia continued researching the possibility of weaponizing Yersinia pestis bacteria. It's reported that the US was unable to cultivate bacteria efficiently enough to create weapons, but Russia was successful not only in producing the bacteria, but also in building a weapon that could aerosolize it. Luckily, it's against international law to utilize biological weapons offensively, only in retaliation for someone else doing it. So these weapons are definitely never going to be deployed by a world government. I mean, definitely rest assured of that one.
I know, right? Talking about, oh, we made it illegal. For who? You're just talking about a whole nother country. If they just decide to say screw everything, like what's going to really stop them at the end of the day? I know you talk about, oh, the Geneva Convention. Let's just be honest here. You get somebody who's crazy enough, and we've had a couple of people that seem like they were crazy enough. They just say screw it, all hell's going to break loose. So there's a reason to be a little nervous about that one.
Terrorists who don't care about international law at all, meaning that plague could pose a very real bioterrorism threat. If a new strain was discovered that was resistant to antibiotics and terrorists were able to cultivate large quantities of it, there's no telling how bad things could be. A single bomb dropped in a city of 5 million people could immediately infect hundreds of thousands. To make matters worse, the bacteria would remain alive in the air for about an hour and could easily cover a 10-kilometer radius from the point of detonation. People would almost certainly flee the city for their lives, but if they'd already breathed in the bacteria, then it would just result in them carrying the disease even further. And since those people would be contagious even before they became symptomatic, they could infect other people who would in turn infect others, and so on and so forth. Look, it's hard to say exactly how many such bioterrorist attacks it would take to effectively wipe out humanity, but if there's any biological weapon that can do it, it's a Yersinia pestis bacteria. It can be airborne, it's 100% fatal if left untreated, and it is becoming increasingly resistant to antibiotics. But like we said, on a day-to-day basis, it probably isn't something you need to worry about. Sure, it's scary, but I mean, it's not like there's anything you could do to stop it anyway. Thanks for watching.
Nothing like a really dark ending, right? You're just sitting in your home, just living your lives. Somewhere out in the world, someone might be doing something it's gonna mess up your day one day. That's something to think about, right? Oh man, interesting stuff. So I hope how many people have been properly traumatized by this one? But still, interesting stuff. It's always good to educate yourself on it, regardless of the jokes and everything. It's always good to really just know these kind of things, you know? Anyway, that's going to do it for that one. So y'all know what to do. Go down in the comment section. Let me know what y'all thought about this one. Let me know what you'd like to see me react to next. Hit that like button before you go. Share this video with everyone you know. And subscribe if you haven't done so already. Alright? So, till next time, take care of yourselves. And I'm out of here.